Season 2 picks up with Tabitha digging her way to China and falling into an underground lair, seemingly beneath her house, leading into a bigger cave that appears to be under the town. In this cave, we see monsters sleeping, but not in their human forms. And I don't know if this is a clue, but in their monster forms. So is that their original form? One standout that I did see is the creepy doll that Victor saw that sent him into a frenzy. To me, it looked like he realized the doll was at the house in various places, seemingly from someone picking up and moving it. But is it a bigger clue that the doll was in the cave, meaning that it moves on its own? If this is an element to the show, this is something we have not seen yet. Now, Jade also saw the doll in the house, but in his vision, it was more like a dream where it jumped at him and then it vanished. So was it really there? We don't know. All we know is that in the cave, there was some significance to the doll and the creatures. Luckily, Tabitha and Victor made it out of the cave unharmed. But look, it was pretty close. This could have been extremely bad for them because we see the monsters try to trick other townspeople and then transforming into what looks like a humanoid creature with claws and jagged fangs. I thought these creatures were vampires, and I'm sure a lot of you guys did too. Especially since early press of the show said it was based on or inspired by some of Stephen King's work, like Echoes of Desperation, The Mist, and It. At the same time, season 1 of From premiered at the same time as the literal adapted series Chapelwaith, also on Epix MGM. These shows ran at the same time, which seemed very similar, meaning a family came into a town where there was some sort of unknown monsters. Now, Chapelwaith clearly identified what the creatures were, but on From, fans are still waiting for such clues on season 2. After the first victim on From, the fans realized the people weren't drained of blood, but seemingly eaten. Then, as more townspeople fell victim, they realized they weren't eaten, but ripped open with their organs removed to look as if they were eating or harvesting the organs for later. If you remember back in season 1 of From, the first episode, the mother and daughter we saw in episode 1 had their rib cages broken outwards. When something eats down, the rib cages are usually broken inward. But if they're broken outward, it's sort of to grab something and pull it out. And you see the missing organs and the blood splattered on the wall, meaning that they weren't necessarily eating, but ripping and breaking open. This shows that the slashing and not eating, which would create the pool of blood around the victim. I doubt that the creatures just live off the organs. It seems like they do harvest them and could be storing and eating them, but not to survive, maybe in some ritualistic sacrifice. Throughout the show, we have seen a few monsters kill people and not eat them, by the Katri and the guy in the bathroom, simp number 1, whose throat got bit off by the teen girl who appeared outside of his window. We didn't see his body afterward. The monsters could have came back for him because we also didn't see him get buried. So we don't know if they put him in the ground and the monsters, who are obviously that we know now under the town, kind of dug up and grabbed him and pulled him down, and they could have removed his organs later. We do know at least that 14 people died at the county house, and if each person has 5 vital organs, that's almost 70 organs between however many monsters, and that could be broken down into 3 meals a day. I want to point out the fact that there is possibly 2 sets of monsters that the creatures could be. I believe the birds are one entity that has not been discussed on this show. I believe the birds are some sort of monsters that watch during the day, and then at night, the creatures that we know and seen on the show come out. I don't think the monsters are there to necessarily eat the people. I think they're there to keep the townspeople in the house and not even think about exploring or trying to find a way out. Some Reddit fans have been calling this the Scooby Doo theory because there's also a strong possibility we find out that yes, people are really dying, but there could be a person or group behind it. This would be a third group of people, possibly in the lighthouse, very similar to the others in Lost. And we know that one of the producers on the show was also a producer on Lost. So what could the monsters be? Could they be ghosts? We have seen that they dress in a very retro style that is different from any of the dates or past flashbacks we've seen on the show. We've seen flashbacks from the 70s, we've seen Civil War flashbacks, and we've seen some other flashbacks that we really can't get a gist of time. So they could be ghosts and spirits able to interact with people in this realm or pocket dimension, as mentioned by one of the cast members. If they are ghosts, I think the monsters are people who have died previously in the town, who are now part of or possessed and controlled by some sort of supernatural spirit. Maybe from past generations, because of the monsters in the 50s milk uniform. Now, I did look up 50s milk uniform, and he did have that. I'm not sure if they were doing milk deliveries in 1978, which is the time we think Victor was a kid, and when the village we saw in the flashback of his, where everyone was killed. Not sure if they had the same type of 50s uniforms in 1978. Now, we did see a flashback where there were past dates written on the wall in Tabitha's dream when she was digging in the basement and then seemingly went up the steps, but ended up in some sort of lighthouse. And there was different things on the steps. And then when she got to the top, there was dates written on the wall. That could have been different times from that pocket dimension, different times from that realm where people were there. And I believe there was a date that was from the 50s. Then also there was the notes in the bottles hung in a tree found by Boyd in the forest. And I believe there was different dates written on them as well. Now, one movie comparison that I would like to make is the movie that's streaming on Netflix called The Ritual. Explained that they were granted extended life by a supernatural being called a martyr. Understand what I'm saying? And yes, that these people were seemingly hippies, but they gave off very creepy vibes in this town controlled by this martyr because it seemingly needed people to worship it. And so that could be one type of thing. But not so much of a martyr would not be some sort of ghost. It would be a supernatural entity, of some sort of monster. Now, the creatures, I'm not saying they take the form of people that you know. So meaning that in episode 1, the old woman said to the young girl, "Open up, it's grandma." And even though the girl responded back, "You don't look like my grandma." And so I don't think they actually take the actual form of people. Like, for example, it was not her grandma, but they just know that from the age of people, with the families, or with the people that they end up in that village or they bring to that town, they know that they do have families, and it's easier to change their appearance to look somewhat relatable. I would also say that the people in the village are being tricked by the creatures. And it seems this brief moment confuses the villagers and allows the creatures to strike. Now, as far as the ravens or the crows, in one of the episodes when Father Cowtree was giving his burial speech, he had a shawl on it, and one side had a sun, and one side had what looked like crows or ravens on it. There were clips in the season 2 trailer of ravens eating a rat, right? And so that's a reoccurring theme that we're seeing. Now, also in the season 2 trailer, kid who got off the bus had a raven on his shirt. And so we're seeing this reoccurring image and trying to figure out the connection. The ravens are often seen in the episodes, including the first episode when the Matthews boy Ethan went up to the down tree, and the ravens sort of formed this murder around them, which is what you call a group of ravens. And we're not sure what it means, but it could be connection to something. So I looked it up, and it says the unforgiven dead takes the shape of birds, crows, ghastly supernatural beings, often considered fae, found in the folk tales of Celtic nations such as Scotland and Ireland. They are part of a larger group of entities collectively known as the Unseeling Court, as well as a part of the older tradition of what is called the Wild Hunt. And there is a huge connection on the show with night and day crows in the episodes. So that could be an explanation of what the crows are and how they tie in with the show, maybe with something we have not seen. So here are some other theories that I have on what the monsters are. A revenant is a revived corpse that haunts the living. Commonly a part of the Celtic and Norse mythology, which would also tie in with the runes or the talismans that include childlike beings, which could be the boy in white, or from the season 2, the twins that we saw. The forms of revenant can also be vampires. The next thing that we think that the theories the monsters could be is what is called a druger. A druger is a revived creature that lives underground and is immune to traditional weapons like guns. We did see Kenny shoot one of the monsters, and it didn't look, he hit him in the shoulder, but it didn't look like blood that came out. It kind of was a puff of smoke and kind of looked like dust, right? So these could be, like I said, revived creatures. They don't have any blood in them, and weapons don't work on them. We also saw Boyd shoot one of the creatures when Father Khatri got slashed and killed. There was no body of a creature after that, and I believe he let off 2 or 3 shots. So that is another example of what the creatures could be. The third and most popular Reddit theory is that the creatures are slow, spelled Slaugh. I do believe that the writers, when they wrote the show, threw around a couple of ideas and combined a couple of myths from a couple of different stories. The Nordic, the Gaelic, Celtic, Wicker, pagan, and the slow seems to be a Scottish Gaelic folklore that also ties in with the rune. Honestly, don't know what the monsters are, and at one point, like I said, I thought they were vampires, but at one point, I did think they were vampires, and like more like the vampires in 30 Days of Night, which, if you're familiar with Boyd, the main character from Harold Perrineau, he did star in part 2 of 30 Days of Night, called 30 Days of Night, Dark Days. And also he was in Z Nation. So this is a one myth that could be closer to the truth. So what is a slough? Google says that they're ghostly, supernatural beings often considered fae. Now that word came up before when I was talking about the crows and the ravens, and how, the symbolism is ghostly supernatural beings often considered fae. And now we're looking at the slough, who are also considered fae, found in the folk tales of Celtic nations such as Scotland and Ireland. So I did watch a from behind the scene clip, and one of the cast members said the monsters changed the people they think they would recognize. And so that is also a power of the slough. So there was just a couple of theories that I wanted to cover and go over and what the monsters possibly could be. If you're like me, you're really enjoying season 1 of From, and now that season 2 has just released, we're enjoying that well, and we're looking for answers. So let me know in the comments what you think the monsters are, or if you looked up what monsters I went over, if you agree with those or not. I'm the Movie Guru, and this is a review of From season 2.